Welcome back to Economic Outlook. Today I want to conclude my oil depletion series with a look at two graphs which attempt to summarize the position of the world's major oil producers. We've learned several lessons through the linearization analysis I presented in past entries, and these two charts are my way to try to best summarize all of the knowledge accumulated into a simple and easy to understand format. The chart works like this. The vertical axis you see displays each country's annual production in 2007 in billions of barrels of oil per year. The horizontal axis shows the depletion level of the country's oil supplies based on cumulative production through 2007, and the best URR estimate either from linearization or expert opinion in the case of countries like Russia. The size of the bubble represents the quantity of oil that the country has left to produce regardless of depletion levels. So this construction divides the graph into four distinct quadrants. In the lower left, you have lower depletion and lower production. In the upper left, you have lower depletion and higher production. The upper right features high production and high depletion, and the lower right features lower production and higher depletion. This method yields a visual representation of production, depletion, and the amount of oil each country has remaining. Countries in the lower left quadrant are less depleted but produce at lower levels than their peers. The upper left quadrant houses the world's most important producers, those which are relatively less depleted and produce at the highest annual rates. The countries in the lower right portion are lower producers that are also in more advanced stages of depletion and decline. Note that the depletion is relative. Only a handful of countries appear to have produced less than half of their oil, and the most critical states are near their estimated peaks. The graph adds a dimension to the depletion-production relationship by displaying the total oil a producer has left. For example, Mexico is less depleted than some of its peers like the UAE and Kuwait. However, both of these countries' remaining reserves are of similar size to Mexico's. The graph also highlights the dominance of Saudi Arabia and Russia. They are the largest producers and have by far the most oil left to produce. Finally, the amount of oil remaining helps put the declines of producers like the United States, Norway, and the United Kingdom into perspective. All are in advanced stages of decline, but the United States has more oil left, even at this stage in its production cycle. The graph's visual representations can be grouped into four types of producers. First, there are what I call emerging producers. The bottom left corner of the graph represents areas which are less depleted, but still lower producing than giants like Saudi Arabia and Russia. The label of emerging does not mean that I expect these countries to grow their production levels significantly. However, some growth is possible in China, Nigeria, and especially in Canada as URR levels increase as non-traditional projects become viable. Other countries like Iran have experienced political upheaval, which has lowered production relative to theoretical capacity. In the future, these countries might be able to grow production in the short term, although long-term gains are far more unlikely. The main reason these countries are emerging producers is that their current depletion status allows them to produce near their current levels for a longer period of time than more depleted nations. As these countries mature, they will shift to the right side of the graph, becoming the second type of producer, stable and mature. These countries have similar production figures to emerging nations, but are in more advanced stages of depletion. This makes it less likely that these producers will be able to increase their capacity. Countries like the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait fall into this category. As these countries age and produce more of their URR, they will gradually shift further to the right on the graph and become the third type of producer. Countries in the lower right quadrant produce less annually and are far more depleted than stable or emerging producers. Therefore, I've labeled them declining importance. The group includes countries like the United Kingdom and Norway, which have acknowledged that their productive life cycles will dwindle within 20 years. The United States is also included. It is the most depleted country in percentage terms. Interestingly, though, the United States still has far more oil left to produce, even at this most advanced stage. This demonstrates the value in this graphical approach. Countries at the same level of depletion may have very different futures. Two countries in this group which are more difficult to quantify are Iraq and Venezuela. The political climate and production history in each country makes estimation difficult. The position of these countries might change if more stable production allows for better explanation of reserves. This leaves one class of producers left, the world's most crucial suppliers. Predictably, this category of producer includes only Saudi Arabia and Russia. Both nations possess the largest oil reserves in the world and produce at the highest rates. For this reason, each country is essential to the global supply and demand balance for oil. The productive capacity of both Russia and Saudi Arabia has been discussed at length in the other parts of this series. However, this graph represents one piece of new information. The Ghawar field, Saudi Arabia's most important, appears to be more depleted than Saudi Arabia as a whole. The graph also shows Ghawar's importance visually. Its remaining oil is a large part of Saudi Arabia's overall reserves. The most important question for these super large producers is how long they will move within the graph as time passes. Optimistic planners assume that both will continue to increase production as demand rises. As we've seen though, this is unlikely to occur barring new discoveries or unforeseen technological advances. A more likely trajectory is for each country to gradually shift down and to the right as each becomes more depleted. There is a historical precedence for this pattern as well. The United States once possessed similar resources to both Saudi Arabia and Russia, approximately 230 billion barrels of URR. Today, the country is still an important producer, but its annual production falls far short of its peak capacity of the late 60s and early 70s. It's not unreasonable to expect Russia and Saudi Arabia to follow a similar pattern as annual production and depletion take their toll. The major question is the time horizon. How long can Russia and Saudi Arabia maintain their current production? What happens to long-term viability if production is increased in the short term? These questions should be central to any discussion of future energy planning. They're also of critical importance to global economic development. Recovery is predicated on growth. Growth necessarily increases private consumption, especially in emerging markets like China. Since high oil prices are a drag on economic expansion, planners and policymakers must begin building sustainable solutions now. These graphs demonstrate the potential peril of waiting until production figures begin to fall. This concludes my series on oil depletion, and I hope you have found it as informative as I have in doing the research. I think the overall message I want to convey is that linearization is not a tool to simply predict what oil production will be in a country in 1 year or 2 years. It's a way to see when countries may be nearing their peak capacities. As we've seen for most countries, that's within the next 20 years. That's why these final two graphs are so important. It shows which countries are the most critical and need the most scrutiny from analysts and industry professionals. I hope that this will spark discussion on our future of oil usage, and I'll see you next time here on Economic Outlook. Thanks for watching.